Welcome back to part 4 of our series where we are parsing XBRL documents that contain all the wonderful financial information we could ever ask for. So in our previous video, we basically finished wrapping up parsing the main 3 filings. Now what we're going to do is we're going to transition over to the HTML file because that actually contains all the values that we want. So basically in the previous videos, all we were getting were things like the definition link. We were getting the label link. So this might tell us things like, for example, like, hey, how is the information labeled? Or how is the information defined, right? So all this wonderful stuff. And then probably the really useful one is calculating, right? So with calculation links, we have the order in which they need to appear and how you calculate them. So that's why that order key is all of a sudden very useful because it's telling us exactly how much weight to give it. And really what we're doing is we're just extracting all that information. And it's actually pretty interesting too when you look at some of the actual calculation ones, because you can see it tells you exactly which line items you need in order to get that element. So I think that's pretty useful, especially when it comes to like trying to recreate stuff. That makes it 10 times easier. So everything below here is basically parse the HTML10Q file. No. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to just do what we did before. So load the file underscore HTML. And so we'll just call it load the HTML file. It's not really an HTML file. It's really a XML file, but it's kind of miscellaneous. There's HTML in it. So it's tree et.parse. And then in this case, it's going to be file HTML. And so if you forgot, that's just pointing directly right here to that guy. So nothing too crazy. Okay. Then from here, let me take a look at it. Because if I'm not covering it, I'm not going to dump it. I'm not going to cover it in this one. I'll cover it later. Yeah, I'm going to wait off on that one. Okay. No worries. What you don't know, you don't know. Okay, so first thing is loop through all the elements. And so this actually isn't too bad, I don't think. It's really following that same logic that we did before. So we're gonna loop through each element. We're gonna make sure there's no, like crazy stuff there, right? No crazy like child elements. And then really what we're looking for are certain keywords, right? And so part of that is I'm gonna have to enhance this one up here to maybe include those ones or something like that. But for right now, I kind of have to keep them separate because each one of these tags contains different pieces of information, and I don't necessarily want all the information. But basically, when we're going to parse this information, some of it's useful, right? So for example, like if we want any of the entity stuff, like that's all kind of right up top, or at least schema sources. We have context, so that's kind of nice too. And then we kind of saw like down below, like this is where things get interesting because we're basically looking for these guys, right? And then this is the non-fraction, and then there's like another one called nonnumeric. So this will contain the ID, it will contain the name, the context reference, the unit reference, decimal, scale, and format, right? So it basically contains all the information that we want, but we've got to look for a very specific tag name in order to find it. So we've got to find non-fraction, and then the other one is nonnumeric. And so that would be situations like this. This might be, context information. I'm not technically parsing the text at this point just because that's a little bit different, but there might be other information in here that is related to context or stuff like that. So we're going to hold off on the text for right now, and we'll just kind of handle that later. But I still want them because I think they're useful elements. So the first one we'll look for is we'll look for non-numeric. So basically, we're just going to ask a really simple question. Does non-numeric exist in that tag name? If it does, then we're going to start parsing some of the elements. Now, this is again is kind of going back up here. We're just simply grabbing values and we're just going to store them in a dictionary. So because that's nothing like, I would say, crazy intensive, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the code I already have and we'll walk through basically what I'm doing. Boom. So for non-numeric tags, I do want a couple pieces of information. So one is I'm going to get the attribute name, but that's really just for storing it, and then the gap ID. And so again, this is just more for storage purposes. So from here, and actually you can kind of see, I'm taking my dictionary that I created up here and I'm passing through the attribute name. So inherently, if I'm able to get it, it means it basically could somehow be tied maybe back up here. In fact, inherently, when I'm looking at this right now, I'm going, you could, I don't know if you could, I'm thinking to myself. But yeah, basically from here, all I'm doing is I'm adding different pieces of that element to my dictionary, so to my gap dictionary. So if you go into each element, you'll see sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. So for example, in the 10Q one, I'm going to scroll up to the top. Where is it? Let me do non-numeric. They'll have things like the context reference. They'll have things like the gap policy, text selection, and then sometimes I'll have the actual text too. Now, for right now, I'm not going to grab the text on this one just because there's a lot of it, but you'll kind of see in the next portion, it's not too hard. It's kind of basically just doing identical what I'm doing before. But I grab the context reference, I grab the ID. Some of them have continued at, some of them have escape, and some of them have format. Not all of them, only some of them. So what I do is I grab the element, I call the attribute property, and then I use the get, and I have a default value if that key doesn't exist. So if you use the get method with a dictionary, it will try to get that key, and if it doesn't, it returns a null value. That's really advantageous in this because there's not always going to be that key. Additionally, once I do this, the next one I look for is my non-fraction one. Nice, know what you're seeing. You're seeing the context. We're not going to cover context in this one. We'll cover it later. But then we have non-fraction. So this really contains what I would say is like the meat stuff, right? This is like the actual like numbers and all that fancy stuff. So with this one, it's pretty much identical. I'm just going to try to grab it. The only thing here that's a little bit different is, other than the fact it's uppercase, I don't like that. I grab the text component. So every element has a text property. So if you go element text, it will return the text of that particular element. And then I strip that text to make sure there's basically nothing there. I don't want like any hidden characters or stuff like that. And then what I do is I also basically see, okay, if there's text and there's not text, then just put it to null and stuff like that. So for right now, let's just kind of print out and see like kind of what everything looks like, right? Because, you know, saying's one thing, seeing's a whole different thing. It's thinking. Oh. So you can see it's basically doing what we were doing before. It's just that with these ones, there's a little bit of a different attribute, but everything we need is pretty much there. So that's the element attribute one. I'm sorry, the non-fraction one. And then this one is the non-numeric one. There's not too many of them, just because the non-numeric ones, that's just more of the actual text component. But for right now, this is just demonstrating that you're grabbing that element and you're grabbing all the attributes out of it and you're storing it in our master dictionary. Now, if I was really messed up, what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to show you this thing as it's growing. But if I do this, it's going to take forever to go. So I don't want to do that. However, what I do want to make sure is I want to make sure, okay, if the gap ID exists, in the storage values, then I'm going to say, take that storage values and update the gap ID that's associated with it. So this is where I'm starting to quote unquote merge the two. So at least from the gap perspective, right? So I'm trying to take that gap one and I'm trying to take it out of the equation and have it just go right into my master storage value so I don't have these two separate ones. For right now, they're separate, but inherently, this is kind of my strategy right now where I'm potentially looking at, can I store those gap values as I'm parsing it, and is it reliable? So it's kind of working. I think it's working for the most part. I just have to do a little bit more testing, but you would kind of see something like this where I'm going to try to see if that gap ID that I'm working with is actually in the actual storage values component. Now, inherently it should, because I'm getting it from my storage gap one. So inherently I'm probably already doing it up here somewhere. But for right now, I'm just kind of keeping them separate until I kind of verify everything's working. But I'm probably doing it up here because it's like, well, if I'm already putting it in here, I probably should be able to put it in the actual one, because the master key is basically the one that is, I think, without it, if I remember correctly, or something like that. But this is basically where I'm trying to merge up the two. Okay, so now that we've done that, we have basically our massive list of information. And so now we kind of want to see, like, what does it all look like? Right? What does all this massive thing look like? Well, we'll do the storage values first. And we can see we have the gap ID. Sometimes I don't think they actually have anything. You kind of just have to try to see where I put it. Yeah, here you go. So like sometimes the gap value does exist, right? And so in those cases, I want to store that gap value. So this is basically where I'm trying to like merge everything up. But in some cases it doesn't exist, right? But inherently there is a gap ID. So part of me is saying like, well, am I missing something? Is there something potentially not there? Again, just a little bit experimenting. Okay, so now that we've got all this wonderful content, it's all nice and hopefully organized. We need it in some type of format that makes sense, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to dump it all into we're going to dump it into a CSV file. Content.csv, CSV. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say with, if I can type, open file name underscore mode W, new lines. I don't want any of those stupid little blank lines that come right after it. So add that. Basically, I'm saying put it in write mode and make sure we don't have any of those stupid blank lines. It's basically like the new line delimiter. And then from here, we're going to create a writer. So create a writer. So we'll say writer equals CSV writer, and then we pass through our file object. And then I basically have some labels, and what I'll do is, again, just for time purposes, I'll just copy it and then we'll kind of walk through it. Okay. So the first one is just going to write my header. So I use the writer object. I call my write row method, and then I pass through a list of the headers that I want, right? And then basically what I do is I'm going to start looping through my storage list. And if you forgot, the storage list is basically all the information that we got up here, right? So that's just all the information that we've been getting. I wouldn't say so much this stuff, but more of like the actual like document link, the calculation link, the label link, like those kind of stuff. So I loop through each one of the dictionaries in that list. I grab all the items because right now it has something else. Because if you remember, this one is basically appending a list to a list. And so the first one is the namespace label, and then the second one is the actual dictionary. So I say, okay, for the second item in my list of list, grab the items, then for each item, write the namespace and then write the list items. And then what I do is I basically repeat this process a little bit, but now I'm going to do it for the second one, right? So this one, I'm going to just change my names a little bit. I'll call this one values. This one's a little bit more complicated, but nothing too bad. So what I'm going to do, ooh, ugly, is I just write the header row. And then what I do is I start at level 1 because this is a nested dictionary. So I'm going to say for storage 1 in storage values. And then I go level 2. And then I say for storage 2 in storage values, storage 1, because again, we're going that next slide level, items, okay. And then again, we can potentially have another level. So we're going to say if the value is a dictionary, then we have one more possible level. So we'll say if is instance storage 2 1. If that's a dictionary, then for storage 3 in storage 2, and then we want the first element, items. What we'll do next is we'll say, okay, now we can actually write it. So write it to the CSV. So obviously you can tell there's room to improve this, to put it nicely. Part of that is probably going to be inherently thinking about how we could maybe simplify the actual, what is the word? Organization process. Because I don't know. To me, it's just like, I don't like having to go through so many levels. I mean, you could use recursion, but it's a whole different beast. And then all I'm really doing here is I am simply just joining multiple lists, because when I write a row, it has to be a list. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, take that list, combine it with that list, and then combine it with the last list. And so basically, I'm just building my master one, right? And so that's if it's a dictionary. If it's not a dictionary, we basically can do what we were doing right here. I'm going to copy this one, but there's one other caveat. In some cases, you won't have a storage 2. And so if storage underscore 2 equals does not equal none, then you can actually write it. Otherwise, we don't care about that one, at least for right now, until I can validate it. So all this is going to do is it's going to take everything and dump it into a CSV file, and then it's going to dump those CSV files basically right here in our main folder. So hopefully there's no issues. We'll see in a second. What did I do wrong? Oh, that's why. Because I forgot here, this one needs to be underscore none. Sorry, not underscored. And that one's fine. This one needs to be a list. I think the other one's fine. Okay, let's see. Okay, perfect. So, and nice thing was that was pretty damn quick. I'm just going to say that. But now we have these massive CSV files, right? So if we go into our wonderful little thing, where am I? No, I'm not. Why am I here? I don't need to be here. No, it is there. I'm losing my mind. Sigma, PySec. There we go. Perfect. Found it. So let's start with the values one. Let's see what popped out in this massive file. Well, we now have an ID, which is massive. We have a label. And we have a value. So if we do Shift Control L, and let's just say I want the US GAAP value, right? Oh, look at that. And then on top of that, I have every little item I need. And you can filter it just a tiny bit more. And you now have every single element inside your financial statement, along with all of its IDs. And if you want it to be really fancy, you could also do ID. You could do a unit reference. You have everything you need to tell you exactly what that item is. So from here, from at least, I'm trying to think the best way to put it. It needs a little bit more massaging. Like I wouldn't put this into a database the way it is right now because everything's like all treated the same, but it's a good starting point and it's in a normalized fashion that we can easily manipulate and say like, hey, I want to unpivot this, right? So for example, this is a great opportunity to talk maybe about Power Pivot, right? So we'll show you. Because ideally, what I would love to do is you can see if I don't care about that one, I don't think. We'll see. You can transform it and you can do pivot column. And you can say that's your value one. No. I don't like why it counts. Like, don't count it. Just put it what it is. There were too many elements in the enumeration to complete this operation. Jeez. Is it really that many? Dang. Ooh, maybe I broke it. Yeah, that shouldn't happen though. There's only like 5 elements. What if I do, I mean, maybe I can't. I'll have to probably look at it. Value. Use the names in the column label to create new columns. No, I want this one. Okay, this is getting good. I just have to fix it again so that way it doesn't aggregate. Don't aggregate. I don't know. I'll figure it out later. I can't think of it right now. I thought it would be super simple, but I guess not. I mean, part of it is I think I have to like filter this and you say like, okay, I just want my IDs. Okay, now that I know my IDs, you know, you could figure out, this probably can be a little bit. And I think the other thing is too, is I forgot my other column over here. That would have been helpful if I kept that, but I didn't because I wasn't thinking. But yeah, so at this point, it's basically like in a fashion where I would say there could be extra transformation steps that if you wanted to take, it'd probably be pretty easy at this point. But I would say also just don't get too attached to this layout right now, especially with this script. A lot could change right now just because it's still a work in progress. And so there's just things that I'm kind of experimenting a little bit with and trying to figure out what might be the best approach for doing it. So at this point, though, I am pretty much done with the video. Oh, that didn't go too far over. If you have any questions, feel free to put them down in the comments below. Otherwise, I will post the initial copy of this to GitHub. And I might, where is it? I might put up my new repo for the SEC stuff. So I created a new repository for Python SEC. So this is where I'm going to basically be creating my library that will be for, I would say, interacting with the SEC. I've barely started it, but I mean, it might just be good for resources at this point, if anything. So I might do that. Otherwise, I'll just put it in my main Sigma coding one, just because I know most people probably go here too. So I'll just keep it there. But yeah, so yeah, you can find this on GitHub. Otherwise, we will see you in our next series. So thanks again for watching, everybody.